This video is to teach you about the elements of art. The elements of art are the building blocks or ingredients of art, meaning they're the pieces that make up an artwork. And as we go through this PowerPoint, you will understand that more. If at any point in the PowerPoint you need to pause to write down the definitions, please do so. I'm just going to move through it, so pause if you need to. Our first element of art is line. We use line in a few different ways in art. If you look at the photograph on the left by Ansel Adams, that uses vertical lines. The objects in the image are predominantly vertical, and it makes sure I move up through the image. There are some horizontal lines, but most things in this image are vertical, and this is why this is a good example of line. The one on the right we use in a different way for line. If you look at it and think about what lines you see, the lines that stand out are the lines of the bridge. Now they're going in all different directions at different angles. But if you look at where they converge in the top left, they converge behind the couple. Now, the point of the artist having these very obvious lines in this artwork was to draw your attention to where the lines converge, which is where the couple is. So the artist intended the couple to be the focal point. So artists use lines in artwork not only to create patterns and designs and repetition, but also to move your eye through an image and bring you to a specific area or a specific direction through the image. The definition of line is a mark with length and direction. It's used to move your eye through an image. The next element of art is color. Color is a pretty obvious one in the basic understanding. Color is color: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and everything in between. The image on the left is a painting by Matisse. This is a great example of color because it has a lot of colors. It has reds, orange, yellows, greens, blues, purple. He really used the full spectrum. He also used a lot of light and dark values of those colors. The one on the right uses primary colors, that red, yellow, blue combination, depending on what medium you're using or how you're talking about it. It might be magenta or cyan, but generally those are primary colors. Now with color, we talk about three different things. Color consists of hue, which is another word for color. It's the technical word for color. So I could say the hue of the man's hat in this painting is red. Intensity is the second thing that we talk about with color, and that is the brightness or dullness. That is how much of the color there is. If it's fluorescent, that's a very, very intense color. And then you can change the dullness, and we'll talk about that later on with other materials that we use. And then the third thing we talk about is value, and that's the lightness or darkness. That is how much black or how much white the color has in it. So how light or how dark it is, creating tints and shades. Our next element of art is value. Now, if you remember from the previous slide, value is the lightness or darkness of a color, meaning how much white or black is in the color. The first picture here by M.C. Escher is a drawing, and that is done in pencil. That is a great example of value, black to white. It has everything in between, grays, dark grays, light grays, value change. I'd like to point out too, on the top right, the scale that goes from dark to light. That's called a value scale. That shows you all of the possible values. On the right side is the white, on the left side is black. So that has the value range. So we judge artworks on value based on a value scale. The M.C. Escher drawing has a good value range because it has the darks, it has medium values, it has lights. Now when we're dealing with color, we can also talk about value. The painting on the right by Pablo Picasso shows value because it has blues, but it has light and dark values of the blues. It has blue with white in it and blue with black in it to create different value. So value is the lightness or darkness of a color, and it's achieved by adding white or black. Our next element of art is shape. Shape is shown in this painting here. Shape is an enclosed area. So it can be enclosed by lines, by colors, by other shapes, by values. If you look at this artwork, this has organic shapes, meaning free-form shapes. The other type of shapes are geometric, and those are any of those mathematical shapes, squares, triangles, rectangles, circles, that are mathematically perfect. So even though this has circles and has stars, they're more organic because they're more free-form and not mathematically perfect. So shape is an area enclosed by other elements. Make sure to write down that it is 2D, it's flat. And there are two types, geometric and organic. And I would recommend drawing a few examples of geometric and organic shapes next to the words. This painting is a good example of shape. Even though it has real things that look 3D, the artist used shapes to break up the space, squares, circles, triangles up towards the top there. So this is a really good example of using shape in art. Our next element of art is form. Whereas shape deals with 2D, form deals with 3D. There are two ways we deal with it in art. On the left is an actual form. So if you work in clay or you work with sculpture, you're creating forms. You're creating 3D artwork. On the right side is a painting by Lucian Freud, and this shows form because the man looks 3D. It's a painting, so he isn't 3D, but he looks 3D. And the artist tricked you and achieved that by drawing the shapes of the man and then creating different values within them to make it look 3D. So form is two different things, a 3D object or something in a 2D artwork that appears to be 3D. So the first definition is the image on the left. The second definition is the image on the right. And then write down the formula, shape plus value equals form. You do not need to write down the example underneath that, but that's just explaining. If you draw a circle on a paper, that's 2D and that's a shape. But if you add shading to that circle in the correct way to make it look like a ball, like a sphere, and make it look 3D, it then becomes a form. So it's saying by taking the shape of the circle and adding shading, which is value to it, you create form. Our next element of art is space. Space is the distance or area around and or within things. Write this next to where you wrote the word space. The two pictures, we will talk about the two different types of space. The first type of space is illustrated in the first image. This painting by Monet shows depth, meaning things look like they're close up and things look like they're far away. This example of space is dealing with foreground, middle ground, and background. Background are things that are far away from you, in the back, behind other things. Middle ground is stuff that is in front of the foreground, but in front of the background, but behind the foreground. The foreground is things that are closest to you, right in front. If you were looking at this picture, the foreground is the grass that looks like it's standing right in front of you. Artists create foreground, middle ground, and background by changing sizes of objects. If you look at the trees that are closer to us are bigger. The trees that look like they're further from us are smaller. They also change the value or the lightness of things. The trees that are smaller are lighter, making them look further away. The trees that are closer are darker. So for type 1, write foreground, middle ground, and background. And it's used to create depth. Depth is an important word to remember. The second image, photo, is an example of our second type of space. This deals with two kinds of space, and they always go together. The black around the flower is the negative space because it's empty. There's nothing in the space. The flower represents our positive space, and that's the space that has something in it, the space that's being filled. So it doesn't matter light versus dark, white versus black. It's simply filled space versus empty space. So positive space is filled with an object or filled with the subject. Negative is empty or surrounding. Our last element of art is texture. Texture is how something feels. If you look at the images on here, they're not artworks, but they're just examples of texture. Now, there are two types of texture. One type you would deal with in sculpture. The other type you would deal with in drawing. These images represent what we call implied texture. They're not actually textured. You can't actually feel the bark or the fabric, but it looks like you can. The image or the drawing represents that texture. The other type of texture that you would use in sculpture is called actual texture. And that's texture that you can actually put your hand on and feel the bumpiness or the softness. So texture is the surface quality or feel of an object. Just some examples for you: smoothness, roughness, softness. And then make sure to write down the two types. Actual is real texture that can actually be felt, and implied is fake. It looks like you can feel it, but you can't. Just an example for you of an artwork that is a great representation of texture. Texture usually has a lot of detail, a lot of small pieces, and it has value to make it look like it's 3D, because that's what texture is. It's 3D surfaces. So you do have to use value and detail to create texture in an artwork.